Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webcast entitled Continuous Security Validation. How effective is your security? I'm Joyce Chuchian, contributing editor for IDG's Strategic Marketing Services, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's topic is about cyber threats and security. We know that security is not an option in any enterprise. It's an essential part of every company, regardless of size, and its importance is growing faster than ever as cyber threats expand and diversify. Security teams are constantly adding new security controls and breach detection tools to prevent cyber attacks, but the threat landscape is changing as increasingly creative and complex attacks are exploiting network and endpoint vulnerabilities on mobile devices, the Internet of Things, and much more. Security teams are constantly adding new security controls and breach detection tools to prevent cyber attacks, but they continue to struggle to keep up with threats and protect organizations. This webcast will focus on the types of threats that are rising, why efforts to prevent them are falling, and what can be done. Joining me here today to discuss this very important topic is Anil Nandagram, Senior Director of Product Marketing at NSS Labs. Anil has more than 16 years of experience driving products and go-to-market strategy in the computer, networking, and security industry. He's a frequent guest speaker at various security conferences, including CERT, and has been a contributing member to the SANS Institute's webinars and publications. Welcome, Anil.
Thank you for having me, Joyce, on this webcast. Hello, everyone.
Thank you for joining me, Anil. Before we begin, I want to let our audience know that at any time during or after the webcast, you can find more valuable resources on today's topic in the resources section of the webcast console. So let's begin. Anil, again, thank you for joining me. This is quite a hot topic, and as we know, one that's constantly changing. Can you start off with a brief overview of what's going on in today's cybersecurity world and give us a little insight into why and how it's changed or evolved into what it is today?
Absolutely, Joyce. Yes, it's indeed a very hot topic, and what we're going to share today is look at the broader landscape, both in terms of the cybersecurity as well as the threats per se, right? If you look at cybersecurity in general, it has evolved in the recent few years. And along with cybersecurity, the threats and the threat landscape has also evolved. And organizations are spending billions of dollars to be able to address the cybersecurity problem, right? If you look at the data point itself, it's around $80 billion in 2016, and the estimates are saying that it's going to be around $90 billion in 2017, right? So even though organizations are spending these billions of dollars, there is still cybersecurity problem on a broader scale. People do want to prevent breaches. People do want to protect assets. But the problem is that cybersecurity is often still a guessing game. And to address this problem, we do have security vendors that are coming out with the latest and the greatest kind of technologies, but these latest and the greatest technologies are still not cutting it. We do have around 1,500 security vendors today that are trying to solve the problem. But given that organizations and the industry in general is spending billions of these dollars, there are security vendors out there which are trying to solve the cybersecurity problem. But the recent analyst studies, the surveys that have been done to enterprises, clearly indicate that most often these cybersecurity efforts and the effectiveness of these security controls that are provided by these security vendors is still a guessing game. If you look at what's going on in terms of the threat and also in terms of the enterprise efforts that are going to address these threats, first and foremost, the threats are clearly on the rise. The recent surveys that we have seen from NSS Labs clearly indicate that almost 80% of these enterprises have detected that there is a significant increase in the number of security threats, especially in the past 12 months. But the sad part is that most of these threats are bypassing defenses. Most of these threats are not being addressed by the existing defenses that they have today in their enterprise security defense portfolio. And even after these threats are being bypassed, if you go and ask these security professionals who are defending against these threats, they feel that they're not able to accurately detect or remediate these kind of threats that are coming at them. So what this clearly indicates is that the threats are having an upper edge. The threats are leading than the defenses. And for enterprises to go and address this problem, they need security professionals. But there is a clear shortage in the industry to get security professionals that are able to go and address these threats and go and fix the necessary technologies that are out there for them to be able to address these threats. So that's kind of the broader state of affairs, Joyce.
Okay, thank you, Anil. So, you mentioned that companies are not able to accurately detect what's coming at them. What are some of the other challenges that companies are facing today?
Great question, Joyce. So one of the challenges that we see from NSS Labs that enterprises are facing today is to be able to get a confidence to protect against these threats. So one of the pertinent data points that we have collected is we have done a recent survey to North American enterprises, and we have asked those enterprises, what are the top technologies that you have deployed, and what are the top technologies that you see value from that you have deployed? So the top technologies that came out of that survey is the next generation firewall, which is the most important network security control for enterprises. The next one in the order is intrusion prevention system, which is most robust, and it's also an inline security control. And the third one, which was interestingly popped up in the top three, is what we are terming from NSS Labs as advanced endpoint protection. So this is the next generation of endpoint protection technologies that enterprises are adopting slowly but at a faster pace. The interesting fact is that even though they have these latest and greatest security technologies deployed, the survey clearly indicated that only 48%, so less than 50% of these enterprises that we have surveyed, believe that their deployed security products are adding any value to them. This clearly indicates that even though they have the latest technologies, they are not feeling confident about the value that these technologies are bringing in to address these latest threats. So the other challenge that we have seen that the enterprises are facing is that most of these enterprises are under duress because they have been asked by their boards to go and look at industry frameworks and compliance mandates and come back and report to them in terms of how their enterprise security postures are with respect to these industry standards or compliance mandates. So the security and risk management leaders are on one side facing this challenge of how do they address the board in terms of showcasing to them the risk posture. But on the other side, they're also facing challenges in terms of what kind of technologies do they have in place that are being asked in these industry standards for them to have in their enterprises. And these technologies are predominantly focused on continuous monitoring of their infrastructure, continuous validating of their security controls. It's about strengthening their posture through validation and evaluation of any kind of vulnerabilities or any kind of exposures that they would have to threats. This is one of those challenging things that enterprises are facing, where they're trying to bridge the gap between what the board is asking them, but then at the same time, trying to see what kind of technologies will help them to get the relevant information so that they can go and address the security and risk issues.
That's a great point, Anil. So you mentioned proactively addressing security problems. How can this be done?
That's a great question, Joyce. So if you look at the industry today, most of the enterprises and organizations are reacting to threats. They are reacting to breaches. But ideally, everyone wants to proactively know about what threats are out there, proactively know about how do they go and fix certain things, rectify certain things before they're actually the victims. So what we from NSS Labs feel is that the need for industry today is how do enterprises get that relevant set of security information so that they can go and look at that security information, but at the same time be able to also go and action on it. So looking at the broader threat landscape and the security technologies that the enterprises have in place, I think the predominant need is classified into these 5 steps that I'm showing here on the slide. The first step is everyone across the world do want to know what are the threats that the attackers are throwing out in the wild? What kind of threats are now coming into existence? For that, what we feel is there should be technology in place that's able to capture those threats that are in the wild. Those threats would be what could be classified as both exploits as well as malware. It's including the ransomware attacks that we have been seeing recently, like WannaCry. Once the capturing of threats is done, how do you mimic an enterprise environment? How do you know what enterprises are predominantly using in terms of their applications and operating systems? Once you have that information, the idea is to use the threats that you have captured and then prioritize those threats based on what an enterprise needs. And once you prioritize those threats, play those threats against your existing security controls that are in place so that you would clearly know what kind of threats have bypassed versus what kind of threats are blocked by your security controls. That gives you a filtered list of what are the unmitigated risks that your organizations could face if these threats would indeed be attacked against your particular organizations. Those unmitigated risks and the information that you have regarding those unmitigated risks, which could be the operating system or the application vulnerabilities, with that kind of relevant information at hand, organizations would be able to go and then say, hey, yes, let's go and address this particular issue because this is of severity for us. And in that essence, they would be able to better manage their security and risk portfolio or posture.
Okay, so we have all this in place, but is there a way to detect threats that could impact an organization before they occur? That is, how can organizations know if their current security is actually working before an actual breach?
That's a great question, Joyce. So this is where we from NSS Labs, based on our rich history of building test labs, building test equipment, building test cases to validate security controls, what we have come up with is to help these enterprises who are now going through a guessing game if their security controls are in fact working. We have built what we call as CAWS, a continuous security validation platform. So what CAWS provides is it provides enterprises an ability to continuously validate their environment and be able to get relevant information so that they can go and take action on where their security gaps are. So as part of the security validation platform, CAWS provides two key things. One is it provides clear metrics in terms of how their security controls are performing. It clearly provides what kind of threats are those security controls blocking, how effective are they, but it also provides those unmitigated risks, even after all of these controls are in place, as to which of those applications and operating system vulnerabilities are being bypassed by those security controls, and they have to act on it to do something about it so that they don't fall victim to these breaches or attacks that are coming towards the organization. This is where the platform provides risk identification in terms of where are the most valuable assets in terms of applications and which of those most valuable assets are indeed vulnerable for threats. So all of this security validation that we are talking about is powered by unique threats that we capture by going out in the wild and finding out which of these threats in the wild are more dominant, which of these threats are targeting enterprises, and we make sure those threats are active, and we use those threats to validate each particular enterprise environment security defenses. And together, this provides a continuous validation so that enterprises get the necessary information for them to reduce the risk, at the same time also mitigate the risk that they're seeing in their operating systems and applications.
Okay, thank you. So we have a way to capture unique threats and, we make sure they're active and we have continuous validation. So of course, my next question is going to be, how does CAWS work? Does it require a system overhaul? Can it be integrated with current systems? And, does it work with legacy systems? Can you give me an idea of that?
Sure, Joyce. To start off, CAWS is a cloud-based subscription as a service platform. So we don't need any kind of physical installation. in enterprise environments. And the thing that comes out big and bold with CAWS as an offering is we are owning the problem for the enterprise customers in the sense that there is no need for them to deploy an additional control or an additional appliance in their environment. So how does CAWS work? So CAWS has a 4-stage process in terms of how it captures the threats, at the same time how it replaces those threats on existing security controls to be able to validate those controls and provide the relevant information for enterprises. So as part of the first stage, CAWS goes into live network environments across the world. It's able to capture threats, and it's able to discover those threats. And once it discovers those threats, it's able to filter down to what kind of threats within all of the threats that are captured are indeed live, are indeed active, but at the same time are causing a threat to organizations. So once it has the rich set of threat information, it, as a second stage, CAWS simulates an enterprise environment. This is based on a rich history of knowing the pulse of enterprise security. We know what kind of enterprise environments exist, and we have created a portfolio of victim machines that actually go in and look at those threats and see if those threats are indeed affecting that particular enterprise. And once we know that, okay, these kind of threats are applicable to enterprises and they're coming after enterprise environments, we do want to see that what kind of controls that enterprises today have in place are indeed protecting against those threats. In most of the cases, the controls have up-to-date signatures that they are able to use to protect against these threats. But oftentimes, there are certain threats that bypass these controls, and we have different mechanisms to be able to look at how good those controls are and how are they performing and how effective are they for the recent threats that are coming across. So for that, we have two kinds of modes that we would operate in. One is we have standard set of configurations and signatures that the security control vendors provide to us that we replay with the threats that we have captured, and we see how do those controls behave. But we also understand that a lot of Fortune 500 or Fortune 1000 customers have their own tuning, own configurations, which we call as private lane for these products, where these threats are run against those private lanes so that those enterprises can specifically see how their configurations, how their tuning is in fact handling those threats that are coming in. So in both these scenarios, the core idea is how do your security controls perform against these latest threats? And once they have that kind of rich information, this is where they're able to find out what is risky to their organization. And once they have the set of alerts and information regarding those threats, they can either go and automate it, they can go and analyze it further through the different capabilities that we have in the platform, but they can also go and integrate with either an SIM platform out there or endpoint solutions that they have.
Okay, thank you, Anil. So we have a good idea of how CAWS works here. So my next question is, what types of features should someone look for in a continuous security validation platform, and how is NSS Labs addressing these elements?
That's a great question, Joyce. So we would like to call out key things in terms of how enterprises could leverage continuous security validation. There are certain aspects of a platform that come in and help out enterprises, but there are certain aspects of risk management that enterprises would get with a continuous validation or a platform like continuous security validation. So predominantly, you want the information that is coming out of this continuous security validation to empower your security and risk management teams with the right set of information so that they could go and take action on it. So in terms of the platform capabilities, one of the primary things that needs to come out of the security validation is to be able to provide organizations how effective are their existing controls. And this should be seamless for them to go and deploy and use the information, whether it's through API or whether it's through a cloud-based user interface that they can go and look at in terms of what kind of threats are coming into their network and which of those threats are not being addressed by the security controls. That's one primary thing that's important in these kind of platforms. The second thing is in terms of managing risks. So once the security teams are aware of what kinds of risks are associated with their applications and operating systems, they should be able to prioritize those risks based on the information that is provided to them. This is where drilling down and finding details in terms of where did the threat come from, which country did it start off from, where was it headed into, which of those verticals did it target before it started targeting my vertical, what kind of information can I gather so that I can go and proactively either create a signature or ask my security control vendor to go and create a signature so that I don't react to a breach. What kind of threats that are available out there are active threats, are indeed something that I need to worry about so that I don't need to worry about false positives that are coming out of threat feeds that I currently have. So these are the kind of technological differentiations as well as risk management benefits that a continuous security validation platform should provide. And CAWS is a platform that we have built that would help both security practitioners as well as a risk management professional for them to go and effectively manage their security and risk posture. So overall, Joyce, in terms of what NSS Labs is proposing for organizations to get secure as well as stay secure is a combination of what we call as our point-in-time validation, which we do in-house through our test labs, where we validate security controls against the latest threats, and we provide detailed test metrics, whether in the shape of a test report, a comparative report comparing different security control vendors out there, and we create what we call a security value map that clearly showcases the performance and the efficacy of these security controls in comparison to the total cost of ownership. So those kind of reports, as well as what we call as analyst on demand, for those organizations who want to know what's their current state of security. What do they have to do to be secure so that they can do the necessary changes on their side for their security posture is what we call as the get secure aspect of things, which we are very well known for the past decade or so. But the topic for today's webinar that we talked about is CAWS. And CAWS helps organizations to move from that point-in-time validation reports that they get from us more towards a continuous validation aspect. CAWS, the continuous security validation platform, provides those key elements so that they can stay secure on an ongoing basis. They'll be able to continuously validate their security controls, which clearly tells them what are the security gaps that they have. They'll be able to mitigate the risks that they see coming from their unpatched applications or unpatched operating system. And with all of this information, they would be able to go towards a path that they could use to action things that would eventually mitigate the risk that they've seen. So overall, NSS Labs using that point-in-time validation through our test reports, as well as CAWS continuous security validation platform, is empowering enterprises so that they can get the relevant information for them to secure and manage the risk.
Okay, thank you, Anil. So I think you have some slides here where you can show us a quick example. So let's take a look at how this all works.
Sure, Joyce. I wanted to give everyone a sneak peek of our CAWS continuous security validation platform. So the CAWS continuous security validation platform will be launched at Black Hat this year. This is a new 3.0 version that we have. There are a couple of key things that I would want audience to take away from these couple of slides that I have here. The screenshot that I'm showing here is the analyzed screenshot within our CAWS platform. The CAWS platform provides an overview of all the threats that we are capturing. It shows that overview of threats that includes their exploits and payloads. But here what we are seeing is pertinent to an enterprise organization. How do they validate those threats against those security products or controls they have, as well as the applications that they're running in their environment? If you look at the left side, the left pane showcases what kind of profiles that enterprise organization has. These are the profiles that the enterprises create. In this example, this enterprise has different offices across the world, and here they have created profiles that have security controls within those offices, but it also has configurations and applications that are associated with those specific controls. So for each particular office, they're able to look at which of those threats in the wild are impacting that particular office. So here on the right side, you can clearly see there are certain set of threats that are bypassing their security control defenses, that are affecting their applications because there are vulnerabilities in those applications. And it clearly showcases out of all of those threats out there, how many of those threats have unique exploits that the security controls are not addressing. And as a matter of fact, how many of your applications that you have are being targeted because of those unique exploits and file exploits that are coming at you, and how many of those threats are not being addressed by your security controls. That's one viewpoint. The second thing that I wanted to bring out is it also gives in details in terms of what kinds of applications that are impacted due to those threats, what kinds of application families are impacted, and what are the total number of threats, whether it's in terms of the exploits or payloads that are impacting that specific application or that specific operating system. So here, if you look at it on the right side, you clearly see that the top application that is vulnerable to these threats that we are seeing out there is the Adobe Reader 9 version. One of the things that I want to point out is different versions of these different applications have different vulnerabilities. So in this particular case, maybe an Adobe Reader 10 could be more secure because it's being impacted by less number of threats, but our Adobe Reader 9 is less secure because it has more threats targeting it because it has more vulnerability. And on a similar note, even the platform here, the Windows 7, has certain number of exploits that it's being impacted by. And this is kind of the pertinent information that we provide so that now they can go and action on it in terms of whether upgrading their Adobe Reader 9 to Adobe Reader 10, or they could go and do the necessary patches that are required in that Windows 7 platform that Microsoft has just released. So the other viewpoint that we also provide in terms of providing relevant information is we provide all of the threat details that are associated that matter to that enterprise. So the threat details that have bypassed the security controls and the threats that are impacting their applications can be drilled down, if you would say, so that analysts can go and see where those threats are coming from. For example, in this scenario, you clearly see that the top sources of threats that are being targeted to that particular enterprise Austin office are coming from Russia, right? And if you look at most of these threats, you can also drill down and see what are the chain of events, what are the command and control servers that these threats are going and talking to, what's the location of these threats. So those are the information that is useful for either an incident response team or an analyst that can go and further take an action so that they can go and mitigate the risk.
Okay, thank you, Anil. Excellent presentation. So before we wrap up, I'd like to ask you one last question. I'd like to ask you if you have any final advice for our audience. We've obviously taken in a lot of information here. We've seen kind of a preview of what's going on. So what would be your advice to those who are interested in this, maybe some key takeaways or best practices?
Sure, Joyce. So the key takeaways are we all in the industry are clearly aware that the security solutions that exist are no more able to prevent threats. So this is clearly an unattainable objective of blocking 100% of these threats. So one of the key takeaways that we are seeing from NSS Labs is that organizations need this new kind of security technologies or solutions that are able to continuously assess and manage the security procedures, their infrastructure, as well as their vulnerabilities and techniques. So they need the relevant information that is needed for them to continuously assess and manage their security and risk postures. So what this helps them to get the necessary empirical data and information so that they can assess their environment. They can assess the security controls that they have in place. Making them sure of what the effectiveness of those solutions makes them better prepared to address these breaches that are coming or these threats that are coming to breach their organization. So as a recommendation, what we say is they should have some kind of security validation platform or service in place that will help them to determine if their security architectures are providing the right protection, as well as if the security configurations that they have are tuned properly so that they can address these new and evolving threat landscapes.
Okay, thank you. Great advice. So continuously assess and manage security, your security posture. That's quite an important issue here, and it sounds like we have a good solution for that. Well, that's about all the time we have. So with that, I'd like to thank Anil Nandigam for his valuable advice and expertise on staying ahead of modern cybersecurity breaches and the benefits of a continuous security validation platform. Thank you, Anil.
Thank you, Joyce. Thank you for having me as a speaker on this webcast.
And I also want to remind the audience to take a look at the resource list provided here on your screen. Thank you again. For IDG and NSS Labs, I'm Joyce Chutchian. Thanks for tuning in.